The story of Malachi unfolds in a time of spiritual exhaustion and disillusionment. The Israelites had returned from Babylonian exile, their temple was rebuilt, and life was slowly being re-established in Jerusalem. This was supposed to be a time of renewed hope, a time when God's people could flourish once again after decades of suffering. They were back in the Promised Land, but something was missing. Their expectations for prosperity and divine favor were not being met. They anticipated that once the temple was rebuilt, God would immediately bless them, and they would experience the glory they had heard about in the stories of their ancestors. But as time passed, the harsh reality of life set in. Political instability, economic hardship, and social struggles plagued the nation. The people were growing weary. They began to question whether God truly cared for them or whether their efforts to rebuild and re-establish their worship were even worth it. Their faith had become weak, and their relationship with God was marked by doubt and complacency. This period, around the mid-5th century BCE, was not one of vibrant spirituality but of declining devotion. The spiritual leaders, the priests, who were supposed to guide the people in worship, had become corrupt, offering sacrifices that showed their disrespect for God's laws. The people, following their example, became indifferent and distant in their relationship with God. Marriages were falling apart, societal values were crumbling, and a spirit of compromise had taken root. In this climate of spiritual and moral decay, God spoke through Malachi, a prophet whose name means, "my messenger." Malachi's message was not one of immediate comfort or blessing, but one of deep conviction. It was a call to remember who God is, a loving and faithful Father, and a challenge to return to Him with sincere hearts. Through Malachi, God addressed the issues of the day, the people's doubt, the priests' corruption, broken marriages, and the general sense of injustice that filled the land. This book marks the final prophetic voice in the Old Testament, standing at the threshold of 400 years of silence before the coming of John the Baptist and the Messiah, Jesus Christ. It is a powerful and profound message, delivered at a time when Israel needed to hear the truth, not just about their actions, but about their hearts. The story of Malachi is a call to faithfulness, an invitation to return to God, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, God is preparing the way for something greater. Join us as we explore how this ancient story still speaks to our lives today, reminding us of God's enduring love and calling us back to Him. The story of Malachi begins in a way that many of us can relate to, a people who have lost sight of God's love, not out of rebellion but out of weariness and disappointment. The Israelites, freshly returned from the Babylonian exile, had high hopes. They rebuilt the temple, expecting that everything would be restored, that blessings would flow, and that God's favor would shine on them like never before. But years had passed, and life was hard. Their expectations remained unmet, and slowly, their faith cooled. It is in this moment of doubt and discouragement that Malachi steps in, delivering God's message. God starts with a tender, heartfelt reminder, "I have loved you," He says. But the people, disillusioned by their hardships, respond, "How have you loved us?" It's a question that many of us have asked when life doesn't go the way we hoped. It's a moment of raw honesty, where the people voice their confusion and disappointment with God. But God doesn't chastise them for their doubt. Instead, He reminds them of His faithfulness throughout history. He points to their ancestor Jacob, the one God chose over Esau. In doing so, God is reminding Israel that His love has been woven through their entire story, even when they didn't recognize it. This isn't just about the past, it's about the future too. God is saying, "I have been faithful before, and I am faithful now." It's a call to remember that God's love is not dependent on circumstances but is rooted in His eternal covenant with His people. Yet, even though God's love is constant, the people's hearts are not. As the conversation unfolds, we see that the priests, the very ones responsible for leading the people in worship, are failing. They're offering sacrifices, but not the best. They're giving God their leftovers, blemished animals, ones that wouldn't even be fit for human leaders, let alone the Almighty. This isn't just a logistical issue, it's a heart issue. The priests have grown complacent. Their worship has become routine, stripped of reverence, and they've forgotten that God deserves their best. But it's not just the priests. The spiritual decay runs deeper, into the very fabric of society. The people themselves are failing to honor their relationships, especially in marriage. Husbands are abandoning their wives, the women they made vows to in the presence of God. Instead, they are seeking out foreign women, those who follow different gods, and in doing so, they are not only breaking their marital covenants but also their covenant with God. This is where the story gets deeply spiritual and personal. God is not just concerned with rituals and sacrifices, He's concerned with the condition of the heart. Marriage, in this story, is symbolic of the relationship between God and His people. The faithfulness, love, and devotion that should define their marriages are also the qualities that should define their relationship with Him. But instead, they have grown distant. They've allowed the pull of the world to lead them astray, just as they've allowed foreign influences to disrupt the sanctity of their homes. I hate divorce, God says, not because of legalism, but because divorce represents a breaking of trust and fidelity. It's a picture of what has happened between Israel and God. The people have turned away from their first love, their true love. Yet, God's heart breaks for them, and He calls them back, urging them to return both in their marriages and in their devotion to Him. But even in the midst of this spiritual decline, the people have another complaint: why do the wicked prosper? They look around and see injustice. Those who do wrong seem to get ahead, while those who try to remain faithful suffer. It feels unfair, and their hearts grow bitter. They begin to wonder if serving God even matters. This is where God speaks into their doubt with a profound promise. He tells them that a day is coming, a day of refining, a day when justice will be restored. I will send my messenger, God says. This messenger, whom we later understand to be John the Baptist, will prepare the way for the coming of the Lord. And when the Lord comes, He will not ignore the wickedness or the injustice. Instead, He will be like a refiner's fire, purifying His people, starting with the priests and leaders. The fire will burn away what is impure, leaving behind only what is good. This refining process is not meant to destroy but to purify. God's desire is not to bring judgment for judgment's sake, but to restore His people to a place of holiness. This is a deeply spiritual moment, a promise that God will not leave His people in their sin, but will come to cleanse them, to restore them to Himself. Then God issues a challenge: return to me, and I will return to you, He says. But the people ask, how are we to return? God points to their tithes and offerings. They had been withholding their full tithe, and in doing so, they were showing a lack of trust in God's provision. God challenges them to test Him, to bring the full tithe into the storehouse and see if He will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out blessings on them. This moment is about more than just money. It's about the heart. God is inviting them to trust Him fully, to believe that He will provide for them if they surrender their lives, their resources, and their hearts back to Him. It's an invitation to step into the flow of God's blessings, not because of what they can get, but because of the relationship that God desires to have with them. Finally, God speaks of the coming day of the Lord. This is a day when justice will be restored, when those who have remained faithful will be vindicated, and the wicked will face the consequences of their actions. For the faithful, it will be a day of great joy and healing. The Sun of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, God says. The faithful will be like calves set free, leaping with joy. But for the wicked, the day will be like a furnace, burning away the stubble. God then points to Elijah, the prophet who will come before this great and dreadful day. Elijah's role will be to turn hearts back to one another, to restore relationships, both between parents and children and between people and God. It's a beautiful picture of reconciliation and renewal, a promise that God will not leave His people in their brokenness but will send a messenger to prepare the way for His ultimate plan of redemption through Jesus Christ. The book of Malachi ends with a sense of expectation. The people are called to remember the law of Moses, to hold on to the teachings that have guided them through the generations, and to look forward to the coming of the Messiah. It's a spiritual invitation to reflect, to return, and to renew their relationship with God, trusting that He is faithful, even when life seems unjust or uncertain. This story is about more than just ancient Israel, it's about us. It's about the times when we, too, question God's love, when we feel weary or distant. It's about the times when our worship becomes routine, when we withhold our best from God, and when our relationships with others and with God begin to fracture. But it's also about hope. It's about God's relentless pursuit of His people, His desire to purify, restore, and bless us. It's about trusting that even in the waiting, even when we don't see immediate justice, God is at work, refining us, preparing us for a deeper relationship with Him. In the end, Malachi is a story of God's love, a love that doesn't give up, a love that calls us back, and a love that promises healing and joy for those who remain faithful. It's a call to live with a heart fully devoted to God, trusting that He is always faithful, always loving, and always working for our good, even when we can't see it.